Hey guys, Tacoma guy here. Subscribe, like, and share. Give me a thumbs up. Can you run a 650-pound spring on your truck? Alright guys, can you run a 650-pound spring on your Tacoma? There's a lot of debate on what spring to run on your Tacoma. There's anywhere from I think the old man MUs are like around 580 pound. Most of aftermarket shocks come with the 600. There's the 650s in the middle, and then you have the 700. And then people talk about different length springs and stuff like that. I'm going to get into that just a little bit. There's a lot of myth about springs and things like that, and here's my experience so far. Here's my Tacoma front end, no bumper. No extra weight at all, no winch, no head and winch, none of that. I do have this giant China light bar on there. If that adds a little weight, I don't know. No rear bumper. I'm supposed to have my rear bumper on there, but we're not talking about the back, we're talking about the front. I have the Fox 2.0, 2.5s, dual adjustment compression, right? Really nice shocks. I love these things. Again, you do have to valve them. I think I have a video coming on that. But for spring setup, can you run the 650-pound spring on this car, on this truck? Yeah, depends on what you want to do with it though, okay? I run the dunes. So what happens is we have limited wheel travel on this front end. I think I have the maximum. I have the longer shocks. These are the longer travel shocks. And I have the Camberg longer travel upper control arm. So this is the longest, what does it give me overall, 9 or 10 inches of wheel travel in the front, and that's maxed out with the stock setup. As much wheel travel as you can get out of the control arms and out of the shock. So when you're at the dunes, that's not a lot of wheel travel to play with to absorb ruts, bumps, whoops, all that stuff, okay? Ultimately you can't do it all, but you can do a majority of it, except for the huge whoops or jumps, and still be able to drive it with this setup. So I wound up going to the 650-pound spring. So for me, running the 650-pound spring was much better. It slows the shock down. Even trail riding, I think it worked much better on the trails. And you can see I have no front sway bar. Okay. I'm not running a front sway bar. So for me, the 650 works good. So I think if you're desert running and running the dunes, that 650 is a very good choice. If you want to get a true 3 inches of lift, that 650 works better too. Now I have changed my lower collar because I have to revalve my own shocks, and to get these springs off is a monster. There's really no way to get them off. So what I did is gave myself more adjustment on the top so I can back that adjustment off and get the springs off. But when you're with the stock collar on the bottom, okay, with the standard collar on the bottom here, see I have a shorter one. There's 3 lengths. A flat one, this medium one, and then the standard one that comes on the Toyotas. This shock adjustment, you'll only be down 3/4 of an inch to maybe an inch to get 3 inches of lift. So when you're trying to get a 3-inch lift, the 650-pound spring is really a much better setup because you don't have to compress that spring. With suspension, there's things called sag and things like that exist. It's hard to get into all that in this video. But with that 600-pound spring, there's no sag. You're compressing that spring and there's no give to it. So in a way, in some senses, that 600 can be over compressed and it's not optimal for the lift, okay? So the 600-pound spring is really probably good for about a 2 to 2.5 inch lift at the most. The nice thing about the 600-pound spring is it does flex more. I'm going to say that this 650 is very hard to flex. Your leaf springs will flex before your front end. I think I'm going to do a clip on it while I'm doing this. So when you're trying to get the front end to flex on 650 without the extra weight, it's very hard. It's a stiffer spring, so it's not going to flex as good. When you're at the dunes, you don't feel it. I can go through my whole wheel travel pretty easy, but it's more controllable with the 650 spring. That 600-pound spring, the front end always felt soft. Okay, no matter what I did, it felt soft, and I didn't want to go to that stiff of dampening. The nice thing about the stiffer spring is now your compression dampening doesn't have to be as crazy. So overall, I think the ride is probably better because you don't have to go crazy stiff on your dampening to make it work. You're like balancing it out. You're putting a heavier spring in, and then you don't have to use quite a stiff of compression dampening, and then the overall ride is probably better, especially for off-road. This setup rocks. On trails, I can go about as fast as I can go faster than you should be going. I think I can go 60, 70 on trails, and that's a little hairy, but it just rocks, okay? Again, I've had like, I think 3 steps of compression of revalving, but I got it set. So with my experience, if you're doing desert running, I would run a 650-pound spring, no matter what. There's people who run lighter. If you have more wheel travel to play with, if you have 12 or 14 inches of wheel travel, then maybe the 600. But if the truck's the stock weight, I'd probably still run the 650. But you could probably get away with the 600 because you're gonna probably have bypass shocks on there to make up the difference. Okay, so then you can have a buttery soft ride and then use the bypasses to do the work. When you only have one shock, that shock's got to do everything. So 600's a little bit on the light side. But now if you're flexing or going through the rocks and things, your front end's going to be stiff. It's not going to, I'll show a clip of the video, your front end doesn't want to flex. So that won't be optimal. So if you're doing rock climbing, probably just stick to the 600 so you get the more flex out of the front end. But then it's not going to be optimal for desert, so you're doing a sacrifice. You have to pick your poison when you're setting up your suspension. Like I say, I complain that these stock shocks don't come valved for off-roading, which they don't, but they're valved for riding like a Cadillac on the street. You want to ride like a Cadillac, you just buy these aftermarket shocks and throw them on. That ride is unbelievable. But as soon as you hit the dunes and it's bouncing all over, you get really pissed off. So your suspension has to be set up for your driving. I want to go fast on the dunes, or fairly fast. I don't want to go crazy fast, but I want to go fast enough to tear around where I don't break stuff. And that's, I think, where I have it. So this 650-pound spring works great for that. So that's what I would recommend. If you have, if you're rock crawling and you have your weight on the front, then get your 650-pound spring. Oh, let's go to spring length. Okay, the spring length issue is people think a longer spring is stiffer, and that's not true. The spring weight is the spring weight, and the only difference is the length is the length. So these people saying I put a bumper on and I went to the longer spring and it held, it's not holding any better. You're just putting more tension. You're just putting more preload on the same weight spring, so you're not getting your sag. Which I can't get into it right now, but there's a little, your spring's not supposed to be fully compressed at ride height. So if you have a 650-pound spring, maybe you're supposed to use 500 pounds of that at ride height, and then as the suspension goes to the travels, when you get the full use of that spring. When you're using these light springs and over compressing them, you're just maxing out that spring before you're even doing anything. The problem is when you get aftermarket springs, they're all 14-inch length springs, and then they don't fit. That's why I went to this medium collar, so it does fit. Okay, you go to that shorter collar, now you can put that 14-inch spring in, and it's not a big deal. Okay, going to that shorter collar does not reduce my spring pressure. It just changes where it's lined up. Now I have enough room to back that collar off. I can get that spring off of there. So it's really hard to get that spring off, and there's very few aftermarket spring compressors that work with aftermarket shocks. So spring length is really just the spring length. So if you have a 14-inch spring, you just adjust your shock to be able to use that spring. It's not going to make it stiffer at all. you're going to have more preload on it. Now, if you have a longer spring, you have more preload on it. But then, if this set from here to the top is a set amount, so on some of these shocks, if you go to too long of a spring, you're going to wind up binding. These coils can stack up and bind against each other, and that's not good. Okay? So the spring length has nothing to do with anything. The spring weight is the only thing you have to worry about. Some people, again, because you have the wrong weight spring, see how far this is going down? Again, this is because I changed the lower mount. But people are compressing their spring down. It's like, oh, I go to a longer spring. Now I'm way up here. Yeah, but the weight of the spring is still the same. Okay, that spring's just longer. Okay, the length of the spring has nothing to do with how stiff it is. It's not how springs work. It's just the length. You have to find the proper length spring for your shock. That's all it is. And if the spring's too long for your shock, you have to find a way to make it work like I did. So that's it. Will a 650-pound spring work? Yes, it will for desert use. And if you're crawling, I'd probably stick to the 600-pound spring. Tacoma guy, subscribe, like, and share. Thanks. Bye.